Well, here we are back here again, Wednesday, midweek here, getting ready for the CFL playoffs that Jason and I were talking offline. A little drag here getting near the end of the CFL season, but we are at the playoffs today. Very exciting. I have my Kraken jersey on. Almost wore my Commanders jersey, hottest team in the NFL, coming off our big Hail Mary. But I thought that would be disrespectful to our Canadian listeners. Although we did beat the Le Habs last night 8-2, so that was exciting. We have Jason and Anthony here. I have some bookkeeping stuff off the top, but first off, Jason, how are you? It's been a couple weeks. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too, Reed. I'm happy to be here. It's been a long time, but we're heading into the playoffs here and ready to go for the stretch run.
Yeah, we have Anthony stepping in. Was trying to get the professor on. I think the professor is professoring. Anthony was on here with me last week. All his work over at Sports Illustrated. Anthony, I wanted to have a little bit of a roundtable today. Do a little CFL preview. You were here last week. What are you most looking forward to here for this weekend?
Just glad that we finally have the playoffs set and we know exactly who's going to play. And, I think your team, Reed, probably has my interest the most because I have no idea which BC team we're going to see. Are we going to see the one from the beginning of the year, or are we going to see the one that was that nearly collapsed at the end of the season? So, really interested to see how the Lions do this weekend.
Yeah, and Anthony and I talked a lot about the Lions last week. I do really want to get Jason's thoughts on all of that. Speaking off the top, just a plug here, like and subscribe. 2 weeks away from the Grey Cup. We'll probably do a similar midweek thing next week, kind of looking forward to the finals. And then we will be live in Vancouver getting that. I'll do a big post, but we're official. Jason and I will be live at the BC Lions Den, part of the media row on Saturday. We'll have all of our guests, as we always do, the Nailers and Farhans, and maybe we'll get Matt Baker or Moj or whoever's walking around, but we'll get all of that, thick of things, Dan, Ralph, everything else. So that should be really exciting. The show did very well last year. Evan was there. I know Evan's going to be a part of it. I don't know if Andy's I don't even know who's coming to Vancouver or not, but I know Evan's going to be there. Jason and I, that's all you need, plus everything else. Anthony, how does that sound? Are you excited to presumably, hopefully watch remote here, our big show coming up in a couple weeks?
Yeah, you get all those people on. I mean, that's going to be a massive show. So, I mean, I always watch your stuff, Reed. So, I'm going to be plugged in and ready to watch.
Well, and I think I'm about ready to pull gloves off and fight with Dave Naylor over this CFL to St. Louis kind of thing. So we've promised that. That's been brewing for a couple weeks. Dave, excuse me, I have a cough here. Dave sent me a YouTube link that I still need to watch, kind of my homework prep for that. But I think that will be exciting because Naylor very high on the CFL at the St. Louis. Why can't we just replicate it like it was back in Dave? Anyway, we'll talk through all of that stuff. Jason, speaking of the Lions, I want to get your thoughts first off. You're obviously going and playing Saskatchewan this weekend, but the game last week, we had Vernon Adams there. I was in attendance. We had a lot of comments of well, Montreal wasn't really playing for anything, and this doesn't matter, and it's vanilla defense. What is that the Lions team? What did you make of that game, and what does that make you think here heading into the weekend?
Well, I mean, it certainly is a very unique situation, the whole Lions season this year, being in a Grey Cup year with all the pressure associated with that. Then you also, bring in a guy in Nathan Rourke's, profile in the middle of a season. I think it's kind of an unprecedented situation. So I think, just based on who Nathan was and what he accomplished with the Lions previously and what VA had already done these past, 2.5 years since he's been a Lion, I think that, it was, destined to really drive a wedge between that team. I think there's definitely got to be, regardless of what they say, and to the credit of Rourke and VA, they have, been very, very friendly with each other, I think, relatively speaking. But, in that locker room, there has to be a division between the guys that are Rourke's guys and VA's guys. And I think that's what we've seen throughout the second half of the season, and why they haven't really hit their stride since that first half of the season, where they looked really good and among the best teams in the league. So I think that going back to VA, I think it started as his team this year. I think it's kind of only right that he, tries to get them going in the playoffs here. But at the end of the day, there still is that division. And I think, until they really move on from VA this offseason, it's not really going to be totally solved on whose team it really is.
Yeah, Anthony, any updated thoughts on that? It reminds me a little bit. I was watching the Steelers game. Was that Monday, right? And you kind of have Russell Wilson sitting there, kind of talking with, Justin Fields here on the sidelines. Okay, we're kind of talking, but like you don't really know how comfortable he is with this because it felt like he kind of lost his job. Similar, obviously different dynamics, but kind of similar situation there. Any updated thoughts on kind of the VA Nathan debacle here and the fact that they're going to obviously ride with VA heading into the playoffs?
I mean, I'm glad that the team is going to go with Vernon Adams. He's clearly the better quarterback for that offense right now. And I think we talked about this last week. Like, no offense to Nathan Rourke. He's got all the potential to be a good starting quarterback in the CFL. I just think after going through 4 NFL teams over the last year plus, and then jumping into the CFL after playing in the NFL for a year plus, playing American football versus Canadian football is 2 different things, and it takes time to adjust. I just don't think Nathan Rourke was really set up for success in the first place. So I'm glad that they're going to go with Adams, who's been in the system for a while. He's got chemistry with the receivers. The team seems to be more comfortable with him. It just makes all the sense in the world. And then when the offseason rolls around, I mean, they got to go with Nathan Rourke. I mean, when you spend the kind of money that you did on him, where he's got the biggest contract in league history, like you got to roll with him. He's got to be your future quarterback, and you got to see what you have in him in the next 2-3 years. So they have to let Adams walk. So it'll be interesting how the Lions kind of adjust next year. But I think for the time being, I mean, this year the last like few months have been just kind of a disaster for this team. It's really disappointing because they started out so good. They were one of the best teams in the league, and I truly thought I really thought it was going to be BC and Montreal meeting each other in the Grey Cup, and technically it could still happen. But everything that's happened, I feel like there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. But like Hussey, you were saying, I think they've done a great job of hiding that. If there is issues, I think they've been able to do a really good job of keeping that behind curtains, which is always a positive thing. So, hopefully they get through this season, and next year they can cut the cord with probably Vernon Adams and, roll on with the future with Nathan Rourke.
It reminds me, and it's obviously different as well, but I just spent the day kind of watching this Anthony Richardson debacle pan out kind of with the Colts, and like, well, we drafted him and we knew it was a project, and then he got injured last year and then he starts this year, and then we're benching him, and like, how much time is enough time? And obviously, we've recounted on here kind of bringing in Nathan and throwing him right into the gauntlet there. I don't know. I feel like they didn't do right by him, but also you certainly didn't do right by VA. Jason, is it I don't know. Is it fair to say that like if the Lions played in America with the heavier amount of American media kind of covering the NFL versus, and obviously the CFL and Farhan and Naylor and everyone do a great job, but like this might be a bigger story than it is, like, because it feels like it's a similar situation, but obviously like the BC Lions are only going to get so much kind of airtime in Vancouver. Is that kind of how you feel?
Yeah, I don't think you'd ever see this situation in the NFL just because, teams really want to declare who is their guy. And I think in the CFL, it's less, pronounced. Usually, teams have their number one guy that they roll with, but it doesn't mean that some teams that the starter can't eventually be overtaken by the backup. But in the NFL, you kind of want, I think Dave Naylor says this a lot, you want to have your backup as a guy that will support the starting quarterback more or less, not necessarily push them to be the number one guy. So I think it would be a huge story if it ever did happen in the NFL. But I think, the quarterback controversy like this, I think is really a one-of-a-kind situation that we've seen in BC this year.
Let's do a couple other news items, and then we'll kind of do a little bit more of a deep dive into these matchups. Anthony, I was at our niece's soccer game Saturday, standing in the rain, watching them. They won a very exciting game. They won. I don't like soccer, but they won, got the goal. It was like 10 seconds of overage left, and then they started again. They're like, wow, that was really close to ending. The news came out, Randy Ambrosie stepping down, getting ousted. You didn't have the full support of the board of governors. Just want to make sure we touch on all that, go around, because none of us have really shared any thoughts on that on here. We'll go first to Anthony on that. Surprise, not, and what do you make of that? Let me see if I can get an article up here.
Yeah, I think it was super surprising. I think he's been in that position since 2015. I think he's done a lot of good for the league. I think in terms of what he's done with getting Americans to watch the CFL, I think has been big. Um, I think just the evolution of where the league has been, and also he probably had the toughest job of any commissioner, and is to get the league through COVID. I mean, they canceled the whole season. They lost millions of dollars. I mean, I can only imagine the turmoil that was going on with with the CFL, because it's really important that they have fans and games, and they're playing the games obviously, but unlike the XFL, which I hate to knock on the XFL for it, but the CFL was able to get through it. They were able to survive. They keep increasing their attendance. I actually just wrote an article on it today that they actually did, I think, 30,000 more fans total. I think they had a 2% increase in attendance from last year. So I think that's a really big thing for the CFL, and he's really helped with that growth process. I'd be really interested to see who is coming up to be the next commissioner, because I'm pretty sure that probably the number one thing they're going to be asked is, hey, when are we getting our 10th team? Is it finally going to happen?
Yeah.
I'm sure that was kind of hovering over Randy this whole time that he's been commissioner. He wasn't able to bring it in. So this next one is that's probably going to be the number one priority, is can we get a 10th team in the CFL? But I think overall, I think he did a good job of during his tenure, and I think the league should be appreciative of it. And I think he did a solid job. But it was a major surprise to see that. You don't see it very often that commissioners are in and out this way, but he did a really solid job.
Yeah, we'll toss here to Jason, and then I'll share my thoughts, because to me, Jason, this doesn't feel like this is that coveted of a role. Like, it feels like it's a little bit more grief than anything else. I'll let you share your thoughts first.
Yeah, absolutely. My first thought was that I wish that even though he wasn't perfect, I think the biggest thing with Ambrosie that I would criticize is that he was a little bit too much of a cheerleader with his rhetoric. And, I think like he was almost overly positive and trying to overspeak what the CFL was capable of doing. But what I was going to say is that, he, in the history of the CFL, I believe he's the second or third longest tenured commissioner. And he's only been there since, I think it was 2017 that he got hired. So that really speaks to how much turnover there is in this role. And I was kind of hoping that he would stay on for, at least another like 5 years or so, because, just to bring some more stability to that position and just show that it's not a complete revolving door. But in terms of the stuff that he did that I think were positives, I think the 7-year collective bargaining agreement was a huge thing. I think getting guarantees as part of the contracts, partially guaranteed money for the first time ever for players. I think that was a big thing. And that has really helped the teams as well retain guys and have less turnover in free agency each year. So I think that helps the league in general, because there was just too much turnover from one year to the next. I think that, the global initiative, if you want to point to things that he didn't do well, I think the global initiative was a complete waste of time. I think, I don't know the dollar value that they've spent on that, but I think, in terms of like real results, I think that it hasn't really produced that many star players, except for some great punters that we've seen in the CFL the last few years, and a couple of noteworthy examples elsewhere on the rosters. So I think that was a waste of time. I think that, the way that he went about, again, talking about the 10th team, just really saying that it was super close. And I get that they did have conditional funding, about a stadium in Halifax before COVID. Then COVID kind of killed that. But that still wasn't like set in stone, and they didn't really have it didn't feel like it was further enough along for him to really say that this thing was in the pipeline. So I think those are my problems I had with Ambrosie, but he definitely did some good. And to be the second or third longest commissioner, I have to look that up. They were saying that on the 3 Down podcast this week, but I think that's an achievement in itself that he stayed in the role this long. And as Anthony said, guided them through COVID.
Yeah, I thought, speaking of 3 Down, I thought it was, Travis, what was it? Travis and Jason Kelsey voted People's Sexiest Podcasters of the Year. I saw Hodge tweet out. I think they were a close second. I would toss this into the mix there. I have slightly more hair than John Hodge. Not much, but I do have slightly more hair there. I will take that. I don't know. To me, the thing with Randy, always been great to the show, friend of the podcast. I think we had him on 3 times talking. Said I could call him a friend of the podcast. I thought the last time I had him on, because how many times are you going to ask about like a 10th team or whatever? But we were talking about, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want to be remembered as? And I thought he got a little emotional and saying like, I really want just the fans to know that like I gave it all to them. And I really like, I work hard every day and I wake up kind of wanting to promote the league. I do believe that. I think it's a tremendously hard position, that we talked about this in the past, and that people on, the CFL commissioner is not like Roger Goodell with the NFL where they have kind of full control. It's very much kind of the lopsided power on that. I don't know who's clamoring for the job. I don't know what else is better out there in terms of that. We've seen Randy deal with the Montreal Alouette sale twice, right? Obviously the Mar Doman sale. Like, these are things that, as a commissioner, you are kind of in the position to help navigate through. And I think all of those things went well. Obviously the COVID and all of that, I think we could have figured out some sort of bubble in Toronto or whatever they were talking about for that. Anthony, any other thoughts on that? Because he said he'll stay, in position until they get someone else voted in. But if the board of governors voted him out, right, 5-4 or whatever, like, I just don't know what those, what anyone else wants for someone else to come in and kind of fill those shoes.
Yeah, if it is true that he was voted out, I kind of wish they didn't announce it as he's retiring. I wish they would just be honest and just say, hey, we're looking for somebody else to come in. I would like a little more transparency from the league on that, because if he did truly get voted out, I mean, why did he get voted out? What was he supposed to accomplish? What were the goals that he didn't reach, instead of just making it? I know they were trying to, save face, PR wise, and try to make it, look like he's retiring and stuff. But, like I said, Reed, I mean, he clearly loves his job, and he wore his heart on his sleeve, and he's done a good job with the league. But I really do want to understand, where did he miss the mark, and what does the next commissioner need to do in order to get the CFL to the next level? So I wish there was a little more transparency on the the league side, because it definitely does not sound like this is a retirement. So that would be the one part that really bothered me about this announcement. But otherwise, it would be really interesting what the next commissioner has to do to get the CFL to the next level.
Yeah, I liked Randy a lot, and as someone that has had the fortune to kind of interview him, and then even people with like the XFL, right? With that, I've talked with Russ at the showcase. He wasn't like on the podcast here. I had Moose on the podcast, right? Had other people in those positions. Like, anytime like you're someone like Randy and you're in that position, you're doing interviews, it's always antagonistic, right? Like, no one's ever coming up to the commissioner and being like, oh, tell me how great. Like, it's always like, well, this was bad, or why didn't you handle this, or this is going wrong. It's like, so you're always kind of in that defensive mode anyway. So I give a lot of grace. Like, and I've gotten a lot of private comments like, hey, when Randy was coming on, a lot of CFL like, ask him this or do this, or hey, be prepared because he's going to do whatever. And you're like, yeah, but you're always on the defensive. That was like when Moose came on and we were talking with Daryl Johnston about the UFL. Like, he knows from the second he comes on, right? Hey, they're going to be asking about this or that. Like, how can I kind of defend that? So you never really get like the full sense of the man or woman kind of in that position. But I don't know. I thought it was really good. Jason, anything else with that? Because I wanted to talk about the Elks, and then we'll kind of do the game stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I actually personally met Randy Ambrosie a couple of years ago. He did this thing called Randy's Road Trip, where he did a stop at every CFL stadium during the off season. I got to meet him here in Hamilton, and for what it's worth, I thought he was a genuine guy. I got to talk to him, shake his hand, and me and my brother asked him about youth sports and what he thinks about the CFL supporting youth sports. And I think he just seemed like a genuine guy, that he was able to be approachable and to do that. So like you said, I think he loved his job. He really did love this position. I think that there was a lot that came along with it, but I think the fact that he was a former player in this league, it shows that he loved this league, and I think that's what you need to have if you want to be the commissioner of the CFL.
We had some other news. I think this just came down pretty quick. I saw Dave Campbell tweeting about this, and 3 Downs got their article up. But Chris Morris can be named new president of the Edmonton Elks moving forward here. Anthony, do you have any quick thoughts? I don't know if you've had a chance to digest all this yet. I know this is just coming down as of I saw it when I was getting ready for the show.
Well, it's quicker than I thought it was going to be. I think a lot of people thought it'd be closer to, the Grey Cup in a couple of weeks, but good first step for Edmonton. They needed to bring in somebody. I think he used to play for the Edmonton Elks. So, I guess the story Edmonton's been doing is, one, Larry Thompson's been a longtime fan. Here comes Chris Morris, who knows the Edmonton Elk system. So they're really trying to push for, hey, we are bringing in local people. We are bringing in people that know the team, that have had some association with them, because they really care about this team winning. So this is a really big first step. And now the next part, obviously, is going to be who's going to be the general manager. And it sounds like they're going to hire a general manager separate from the head coach, which is probably a good move after what happened with Coach Jones over the last 2 to 3 years. So be interested, what direction do they go with general manager? But I think that this sounds like, obviously I'm an outsider just learning about the CFL over the last couple of years, but this seems like a good first step in getting the Edmonton Elks to where they need to be.
Yeah, Jason, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know too much about Chris Morris personally, other than the fact that he's the coach of the Alberta Golden Bears for the last several years. But one thing I did see in a report, I think 3 Down put this out, is that they're looking to hire both their GM and the head coach, and obviously they hired the president. They're going to hire the president tomorrow by the Grey Cup. So that seems like a really short timeline. We might get a lot of news coming in the next couple of weeks. But in terms of Chris Morris, the person, I don't know too much about him. I have to dig in further. I'll be completely honest about that. But, Edmonton, I think you're right, Anthony. I think they need to have those people that are invested in the local community. And I think, this is a good start in doing that.
It was interesting. I think it was Dave Campbell put out, I think Edmonton must have done kind of their end of the season stuff and talking about, who's coming back or what's going on. And, you had the whole Trey Ford thing and like, well, he's undecided. And I just tweeted, like, I would tell him to kiss my ass and walk out the door and tell him, you've had the time on here. I don't know if you can get, I think Anthony and I talked last week, right? Okay, maybe you get the new owner in there and say, hey, we're really committed to you, or we're trying to kind of figure this out. Anthony, any updated thoughts on that? And then we'll let Jason share, and then we can kind of figure out what we want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most important thing is you bring in a whole new staff, a whole new system. Like you got to change everything with Edmonton, and you got to let Trey Ford know we're serious about changing this franchise and making it people who actually care about winning, because the previous regime clearly did not care about winning because they didn't put in the better quarterback at the end of the day. I mean, Trey Ford for the last 2 years has been the best quarterback on this team, and it almost like is like they have refused to put this guy on the field for some weird reason. I don't know what it is. I know some of it speculation was, the maturity issue or whatever, but Trey Ford has been the best quarterback on the team for the last 2 years. So bringing in someone like Larry Thompson, bringing in Chris Morris, and then, whatever they end up doing with the GM and the head coach, they have to make a statement by showing Trey Ford, hey, we are making changes. We're bringing in the top people, and you're going to be our franchise quarterback. So we're going to show it to you with a contract. So that's really the big thing Edmonton's got to do. And like we talked about last week, it's got to come from Larry Thompson. He's got to deliver that message to Trey Ford and bring him home.
Jason, let's also touch on, do you have any other updated thoughts on Trey Ford? Because I forgot, I want to talk Calgary too before we get into everything else. Any other thoughts on Trey and the Edmonton Elks?
Well, speaking of the Alberta teams, I don't think it's a slam dunk that, if they can get Vernon Adams Jr., I think they do that in a heartbeat instead of bringing back Trey Ford. So I think that we could see, a little bit of a bidding war between the two Calgary teams. And then if Vernon Adams goes to Edmonton, maybe Trey Ford goes and says, screw you, Edmonton, I'm going to Calgary. So it's going to be really interesting. It's always interesting when in this league, when there's only so many chairs available. Like if Trey Ford wants to go elsewhere, where else is he going to go, right? So there's only so many starting spots and premium, backup positions available in the league. So those are just my thoughts on that.
I was just looking up here. How old? Trey Ford's 26, still got time, but you get to this point now, and he's coming off his rookie deal. You're really going to have to pay up for that. Yeah. The other thing, speaking Calgary, keeping Dave as president, right, or head coach and GM, but then parting ways with some of their other coordinators. Anthony, first, surprised that Dickinson's sticking around there. I mean, I know we talk sometimes coaching with the CFL and like how many people want to do, or is there a vast pool of people? Are you surprised kind of with Calgary's decisions here heading into the offseason?
I mean, it's tough because Dave has done such a great job with this franchise that, I mean, it's only been the last 2 years that this franchise has struggled. So it's really hard to kind of judge it off of that, because I think he's taken them to like 3 Grey Cups and they've won one. So, I mean, he's had a lot of success since he's been with the Stampeders. Unfortunately, he's going to be the head coach known for kind of breaking the schneid on consecutive years they made the playoffs, which is unfortunate. But now he's gone, and he's also gone back-to-back years with a losing record. But I've always kind of gone with the rule of thirds. Like you give someone 3 years to get the job done. I think there was an understanding when Bo Levi Mitchell left that this team was kind of going through our transitional period. It was not going to be smooth. It was not going to, it was not going to be the best moments for them. So I think this is kind of the third and last. Like if I'm the Calgary front office, if I'm if I'm part of that front office, I would let him know, like, this is probably his last year. Like, he's going to have to get it done. Like, this is a make or break here. Like, don't be surprised if he makes the kind of moves that, like, the Edmonton Elks were making last offseason where Chris Jones was desperate and needed to get as many guys as possible and, maybe change a quarterback and try to get all these new pieces in place to try to fix what's happening. So, no, I'm not surprised, but I am glad that he's making changes on the coaching staff. These were changes that were absolutely needed, even though some of those guys were very, long tenured guys that were on the staff. The Stampeders need a shakeup. They need to change, some aspects about their coaching staff. So it looks like there was more of a focus on the defensive side, which is probably good. They were, for a defense that added a lot of good pieces in the secondary, this was one of the weaker defenses in the CFL. So they really need to make some changes there. So, and then obviously the other question is going to be, what do they do at quarterback? Dave's job is going to be dependent on, what does he end up doing? Does he end up going with PJ Walker? Does he bring back Jake Mayer? Do they go somewhere else in free agency for it? There's if he can knock that out of the park, that will probably save his job. But 2025 is going to be make or break for him.
Yeah, Jason, I think it's interesting because obviously BC, right, we'll talk ride with Nathan, presumably, right? Toronto's kind of locked up. I guess Ottawa, right? Drew Brown. I mean, these are conversations, for some of these playoff teams still to be had. Sask with Trevor Harris. But yeah, both of these Alberta teams really seem like, Elks were really trying to figure this out with trade for whatever. But yeah, there's no way in hell that Dave Dickinson goes into this and it's like, Jake Mayer is my guy next season. Like, I'm pinning my job on this, right? So I know we all are rooting for PJ Walker just because of his XFL, pedigree and all of that. But realistically, like, I know this is too far to tell, but like, what early thoughts on kind of what they do here? Because I don't know if like does PJ, yes, in a fever dream, come in and win the job and play, but I think that they're probably going to have to make a bigger swing than that.
Yeah, I think it has to be the Vernon Adams move, or like I said, the crazy scenario where Trey Ford comes, because I think you can't sell this fan base, which is, not showing up in as big a numbers as they used to, the games, that you can't sell them on Jake Mayer, another year of Jake Mayer. And I was a big believer in Jake Mayer. I think we both were, Reed. I think, the way he played the first 10 or so games of his career, he looked like he had a lot of promise in this league. But unfortunately, whether it was him or a lot of the situation around him, I think it just didn't work in Calgary. And I think he would benefit a lot from a fresh start somewhere else. And Calgary would just benefit a lot from getting a guy that's more of a proven guy. That's why I think it would be better for them to get VA than go with the Trey Ford, or maybe I'll throw another name out there, Davis Alexander, because I believe he's a free agent and he's looked really good. And I think he was 6-0 this year or something like that in the games that he started. So I think that, Calgary, the thing with Dickinson, I probably would have moved on from him, but I do get with their opinion of, let's see what he does with another quarterback. If he can bring in a veteran quarterback that's a proven quarterback, let's see if he's still that coach. But I have doubts with that because I've seen some of the play calling he's been using the last several years in Calgary, or last 2 years, I should say, particularly, and it's just too many screens. I think he was part of the problem. It wasn't just Jake Mayer. I think he was not even allowing Jake Mayer to really push the ball downfield too often. It was just, quick snap, get the ball out of your hands on a screen pass, and that was a lot of their offense. So Dickinson will probably have to look back to the drawing board if he wants to have success next year and bring in a new quarterback. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens going forward in Calgary with the changes that they made to the coaching staff elsewhere.
Well, and Anthony, what I want to hear, what we can use this kind of transition to the playoff step, but here, so we had Calgary play last week, end of the season, doesn't matter at all for Calgary. They just played Jake, right? Like, were you, I tweet, because I think it was Mark Stevenson posted like, hey, it looks like, Jake's going to be the starter this weekend. And I'm like, what the hell are we doing here? Like, why wouldn't you give anyone else? I know there was a lot of criticism. I think I saw about Sask not showing up for the game. I think it was a Jamie Nye kind of thing where he's like, man, like this team really looks lifeless. But here you're going into the offseason. Why the hell not play someone else here? You roll back Jake Mayer. I mean, he plays fine, 19, 26 and all this, but are you surprised kind of even going into this? They're like, well, we're still going to play Jake Mayer here.
I mean, I think Dave Dickinson's still trying to decide what he wants to do at quarterback. And I'm going to defend Jake Mayer a little bit. I mean, I actually think he played better than what he did last year. I mean, statistically, he threw more touchdowns and less interceptions than what he did last year. And I think also he wasn't like stuck in the pocket like he was last year. He seemed a little more loose. He could move out of the pocket, make some throws on the run. So I think the development was kind of getting there with Jake Mayer. But like Hussey said, I think he was kind of held back from what he can truly do. Like if there was a 10th CFL team, I could see Jake Mayer starting for that 10th team. Like I actually think there is some potential there, but it's just something isn't working there in Calgary. You know, does it come down to Dave Dickinson? I don't know, but I think this was a move to be like, hey, let's play Jake Mayer. Let's see if maybe there's some glimmer of hope of, hey, maybe we can bring him in and maybe compete as the second or third quarterback, or bring in someone from the outside. I think I think Dave is still trying to decide what he wants to do, because there's a lot of things he's going to have to fix in the offseason. A lot of it's going to come from the defensive side of the ball, but then on the offensive side, it's all about the quarterback position. I think right now he probably doesn't know what he's going to do, so he probably wanted to get Jake out there one more time to get some extra tape and then figure out in the offseason who he wants to go with.
I don't disagree with you, Anthony, but I do think that that's like insane. I mean, you do hear that all the time, and I don't think you're like, wow, we got to see her. It's like when these coaches try to do like the 2 quarterback system and like, well, we're trying to get like, do you really think like pulling the guys in and out after everything? Like, I agree with you though. That's probably the thought process. Jason, anything else on that? Of just like we're rolling out Jake, like on this one more game here, you're playing against Jack Cohn and Shea Patterson here. Like it doesn't even matter, but it just was wild to me that we wouldn't get a sight on anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that Logan Bonner looked so bad in that one game that he played, and then Matthew Schultz, I believe, was hurt, or like there was no point of really playing him either, right? And then PJ Walker had something where it's like he would be ineligible to sign on the practice squad or something like that, or if he remained on the Calgary practice squad, he could still sign in the NFL this year and wouldn't finish the season on a CFL roster. So there was something to do with that, and I think that going forward, it will be interesting to see what they do. I think that, regardless of what, Jake Mayer's shown in Calgary, I think that there needs to be a clean break there. I think both of these guys, Dickinson and Mayer, can still have success in this league in the respective roles. But I think in order for that to happen, they have to go their separate ways, and Mayer has to go and find his game elsewhere. I think he'd be a very intriguing backup for some team in the CFL. I think he instantly becomes arguably the best backup in the league. I think even right now, I would still say he's like the 7th best quarterback, or around there, 6th or 7th best quarterback in the league. So I think ultimately that's what they have to do, and they have to have a clean break here and go in a different direction this offseason.
Yeah, you got it. This is a cycle here of it's like when you're in a bad relationship with someone. Like, honey, we just got to move on. We got to get out of here. Blake checking in. What up? Assuming that's Blake that we were hanging out with here at the BC here last week. I was hanging out with him and Jim Mullen, chatting it up. Let's look here to I had it here, and then we've had all these tabs going up here. The CFL schedule. Playoffs, right? It's going to be Ottawa. I'll get this pulled up eventually, but we're going to have Ottawa at Toronto, right? Let's go first to Anthony on here. Ottawa had the chance, right, to host home field, ended up botching that. Thoughts on this one here? Ottawa going into Toronto here, playing the playoffs.
I think Ottawa's biggest issue is, how are they going to protect Drew Brown? Toronto is top in the league in sacks. Their defensive line, they have 4 guys that have 6 or more sacks. I mean, this is such a dominant defensive line. I think it's a nightmare matchup for Ottawa. They have struggled against them. I'll give Drew Brown credit. The last couple of weeks, he's played really well, but he's been kind of maybe inconsistent at best, but there's a lot of good traits to him that I think he can potentially be a really good starting quarterback in the CFL. But I mean, he's got no running game since Armstead has left. This has probably been the worst rushing attack in the CFL. I think the offensive line is really going to struggle against that Toronto front 4. And then you look at the Argonauts. I mean, they have the experience. I mean, this is a team that's been to the postseason year in and year out. Ottawa hasn't been in since 2018. they're going to be heavy underdogs. I think what's going to happen here is I fully expect Toronto to get off to a fast start, get a nice lead, and then Ottawa's going to do what Ottawa does best and score 20, 25 points in the second half and make it closer than what people think it is. But ultimately, I think Toronto's just a better team. They got home field advantage. Chad Kelly has played really well over the last month or so. He's really cleaned up since he got back from his suspension. And I just think Toronto's better on paper. And I think the key matchup is, can Ottawa's offensive line really hold up that defensive line for Toronto? Because if they can't, then it's going to be a long day for the Red Blacks.
Yeah, Jason, what do you make? Because right, I think I saw the email. Chad Kelly, right, getting honors again this week for I think last week of the season, getting one of the top, the spotlight kind of the whatever. Like, he's gotten better. I think Toronto had 7,000 whatever increase in attendance. So Anthony, were you someone like, I saw that, like, clearly the Chad Kelly sit out maybe didn't hold as much water as maybe people thought here. But what do you make of Toronto and Chad Kelly and everything else going into this?
Well, I think that Toronto should be considered heavy favorites going into this game. I mean, Ottawa was 2-7 on the road this year. I think that, thing with them, I think, is what Drew Brown are we going to get? He's had really great games, as Anthony said, but he's also had some really bad games as well. Gotten injured a little bit in there too. So we still don't know if he's the guy in Ottawa, whereas Chad Kelly, say what you want about him personally, but we know that he's the guy as a football player, right? He is a guy that, the first couple games he came back, one of these games was against the Red Blacks where he had, a couple of unfortunate turnovers, and Ottawa actually blew them out in that one. But those first couple games were almost like Chad Kelly's preseason after coming off the suspension. And the last handful of weeks he has looked a lot better. And Toronto's looked like, in my opinion, arguably the best team in the CFL the last 5 weeks, other than maybe Winnipeg. So I think Toronto should roll in this one. I think that there's potential there for Drew Brown to have a big game. Toronto was second last in passing yards allowed this year. So maybe Drew Brown can have, kind of a great game and, build off that fourth quarter he had a couple of weeks ago against Toronto. But I think ultimately, Toronto is the better and more deeper team, more well-rounded team, like their special teams better too. So I think ultimately I like Toronto to win this game.
So Anthony, so let's say Toronto that takes care of business, right? Ottawa's out, 9-8-1 on the season here. We like Jason said, we still don't know about Drew Brown. Like, what do they do? Because it feels like the whole time that I've ever podcasted the Red Blacks, it's like, what do they want to be? What's the identity? What's going on? And we've had all these injuries. Like, have you seen enough this year from Ottawa where you're like, okay, yeah, there's a lot of good pieces here we can bring back into next season, or what would you do?
I mean, you got to consider this too. I mean, Darius Pickett got injured, and I really think since he left, he got injured. Like, Ottawa's defense has not been the same. So I think they really lost a key leader on that defense. That I think that's where the downward spiral kind of began for this team, is not having him there. So I think if he's healthy and comes back next year, I think they'll be fine. You got to think about Devontae Williams. He was their starting running back last year. They lost him for the season due to injury before the season started. They're going to have him back next year. So I think that will kind of alleviate the issues in the running game. So yeah, I think the pieces are there. I mean, they have a really good receiving core. I mean, Khalil Pippleton has been a really standout guy that they kind of found that popped out of nowhere, and probably one of the top rookies in the CFL at the receiving core. You got Justin Hardy, you got Nick Mardner. They have a lot of talent on that offense, and I think the defense is really solid too. I mean, Michael Wakefield's been one of the best pass rushers in this league, and he's had a really good season for the Red Blacks. So the pieces are there. They may have to do a little bit more, maybe in the secondary, maybe add a piece or two more, but I think they're a couple pieces away from actually being really good. And also, Drew Brown's got his first full year as a starting quarterback, worked out the kinks and all that. So season 2 should see some improvement with him. I think this Ottawa team is in really good position for the future. I don't know if this is going to be a Grey Cup team in the next year or two, but I think they have the pieces in place to be a competitive team.
It seems, well, and obviously like making the playoffs, right? Like Bob Dice is safe, like everyone, because like that's clearly like the barrier, the whatever we have here, the litmus line. Like, well, if you make the playoffs, like you're fine. Like even if you're going to get kicked out immediately or lose to Toronto in embarrassing fashion, but like. You figure Bob's back, right? Dice, everyone else, Jason, Sean Burke. You feel like Right. I just kind of get stuck in this where it's like, we run it back, but we kind of seen what we see. Like, I just don't know how many kind of wax at the pinata here we get from some of these CFL teams. I don't know if that's a good metaphor for that, but I don't know. Any other thoughts on kind of the front? I don't know how Ottawa kind of addresses this.
Well, I think that, in most cases, as you say, making the playoffs in the CFL isn't that much of an achievement, but given the context of where this team was the last 4 years. So they missed the playoffs 4 straight years, not counting 2020, obviously, when they didn't play. 2019, 2021, 2022, 2023, all missed playoffs, and they weren't particularly competitive in any of those seasons. So I think regardless of what happens, if they get blown out by Toronto in this playoff game, I still consider this season a win because it was a return to relevancy for this team. I was kind of hoping for the same result for Edmonton this year, but unfortunately this, got behind the 8 ball so early in the season. So I do think, Ottawa definitely took a step in the right direction this year. I think, going forward, whether or not, like Anthony said, are they a Grey Cup team? I think they still need to add some more pieces. And like I said, I don't know yet if Drew Brown is really the guy to lead them there, but I think I've seen enough to give him another season of that. And, hopefully, he can, string together enough of those great performances that you feel comfortable going into him with him as your franchise quarterback of the future. So I think that's the big question for Ottawa, but I think in terms of stabilizing the organization and giving fans some hope, like this team went 7-1-1 at home this year. I think that's a big thing after that huge home losing streak that they had for a while there. So, I think baby steps for Ottawa, and this was a step in the right direction regardless of what happens on Saturday.
Yeah, it was that famous time when 3 different CFL teams, I think, had home losing streaks at the same time. It's like, how is this even possible? It's like right now, Anthony, I was looking at the NFL draft order, right? And you're like, how are all of these teams 1-6 or 2-6? Like, how are all of these teams so awful? I mean, obviously the NFL has a lot more teams. Anthony, presumably Toronto takes care of business, right? We see a repeat of last year with Montreal kind of here in the finals. Early predictions, because we'll probably do obviously chatty next week of some kind. We'll figure that out. But early thoughts on that with Toronto and Montreal?
It's going to be a much more competitive game than it was last year. I doubt we see 9 turnovers again from the Argonauts. I expect them to be a lot more competitive. Look, I think this Montreal team, I really like their defense, but that offense has not been the same over the last month or two. I think the last 6 games they've gone 2-3-1. I think losing Tyson Philpott absolutely killed this offense. It just seemed like they went on a downward spiral. And even though they got Austin Mack back, even he's not really 100% right now. He's been in and out of the lineup with injury. So, really outside of him and Charleston Rambo, I mean, they have some nice receivers there, but it just feels like this passing offense has not been where it needs to be. And, Cody Fajardo is still playing well. I mean, he's not playing great like he did at the beginning of the season. He's being efficient and protecting the football. But the one thing this offense is really lacking in Montreal is that big play. I mean, they can't get any big pass plays down the field. They just don't have that defense. They don't have that big difference maker like Tyson Philpott was. And plus, the running game has not been as good this year. They don't have William Stanback. They have, Walter Fletcher, who's been nice, but this is still one of the worst rushing attacks in the league. So that offense for Montreal, I mean, really scares me, and that Toronto defense is really good. I think this is going to be a low scoring affair, and honestly would not surprise me if Toronto wins that game. I probably still pick Montreal in a very close matchup, but would not surprise me in the least if Toronto picks off Montreal and upsets them to get in the Grey Cup.
Yeah, Jason, it does feel like, and I admittedly haven't been as tuned in to all the minutia every week this year. We've talked about that on the podcast, but it does feel like Montreal is riding a little bit off of they're the Grey Cup champs last year, right? And we kind of wrote them off last year, and they kind of surprised everyone. And hasn't been as explosive of a team, like Anthony said, hasn't been as dominant as they were. What's the record this year? 12-5. I mean, obviously still the most wins in the CFL. 12-5-1, but what I can't remember what the heck they were last year, but very, very good record. I have thoughts on that as I break my microphone here, just them not having the same juice as they did last season.
Well, I'll say this: it is very different being the favorite, whereas being, the underdog versus being the underdog, I should say. And that's what Montreal was last year. They were a true underdog. Nobody was picking this team to win, the Grey Cup, or even go into Toronto and really have a game with them. The 16-2 Argos, of course, they're going to beat the Alouettes that didn't beat a winning team or one of the better teams in the league last year in the regular season, but there was no pressure on them. They had some things go their way in that game, and I think they kind of caught Toronto by surprise. And I don't think the same is going to happen this year. I think if that game does happen, assuming Toronto beats Ottawa on Saturday, I do think I'm going to be picking Toronto to win that game against Montreal, because I think they're going to remember what happened last year. I think that there's going to be a lot of motivation on that Toronto side, and I think that on a neutral field, most weeks I would pick Toronto to win. I think they have a better team, even though that game is going to be in Montreal, and that's a tough place to play. And they've been really packing that barn this year. But I think that Toronto, they have the better quarterback right now. I think, Cody Fajardo, obviously he turned into like Superman last year for the playoffs and the Grey Cup in particular. But I think, we haven't seen that the last couple of months, as Anthony alluded to. The first half of the season was spectacular for this team, and they were really riding that high. But I think they've kind of cooled off, and they're not quite the same defense as they were last year. I think that it's still probably the best defense, arguably, in the CFL. It's right up there in the conversation, but I don't see that dominance. And like I said, the turnovers that they got last year in that game really swung. And I think, what did they force? Like 7 turnovers, something in that game. That really swung the scale in that game. And I think that we're not going to see that this time around. And I think it's going to be a great game, but I think Toronto would be my pick to win that game.
Yeah, I think Chad Kelly just threw another interception. I think I just heard that. But I mean, can we? And Tim Capper's checking in. I was just gonna talk about Tim here. Tim's checking in here. I'm picking Ottawa with the upset over Toronto. Wow. I was gonna say Montreal has done a great job packing, and you were talking about attendance and all of that. I saw Tim and Cliffy last week. I saw them selling their merch and tailgating and all of that. I mean, but it is like they've certainly renewed that fan base there, right? And there's been a lot of excitement coming off of that. I think that they've really played that well. I will say, yeah, I think I love Cody. I think Cody is a great quarterback that really had an exceptional moment right in the Grey Cup. I don't know if that is Cody Fajardo every day, all the like you look at some of the elite quarterbacks kind of in the sport right now. Like, I don't know. I think he lived up to that moment, right? And if he doesn't make those throws, and like his legacy is wildly different. But I think that there's kind of a step there. There's been a lot of conversation this week about like good, great, and then special quarterbacks with the Jane Daniels and all of that. And there's all these, I'm seeing all these different people talking all this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think Cody's right at that other level, and I don't. I think he can step up to that, but I don't know if he lives in that space. Anthony, anything else on that? Because I want to make sure we talk BC and Sask and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big playoffs for Cody Fajardo, because I don't know how much longer he's going to play. I know he's a little bit on the older age. I will say for Montreal, please do not let Davis Alexander go. Don't make the same mistake Winnipeg did and let Drew Brown walk. I really think Davis Alexander could be the future for this team. The way he's played this year, I mean, he's been undefeated as a starting quarterback, and I think he's only thrown like 1 pick this season. Like, that's a guy that can really make a difference for this team. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if maybe he sneaks in, get some playoff playing time, if something happens to Cody Fajardo. But yeah, I don't know. Now that the more that I think about it, the more I want to go with Toronto now to beat Montreal, because I just the defense makes a difference for me. And I think Toronto's defense versus Montreal's offense is just a better matchup for the Argos, vice versa, versus Montreal's defense versus Toronto's offense. I'm going to change my pick. I'm going to say Toronto would beat Montreal. I think Hussey, you convinced me. I think the Argos would win.
I'm rooting for Montreal. I like Montreal. They still carry over a lot of favoritism there. Talked with a lot. We haven't, has many player interviews for lately, but they did a lot of work there with Montreal. I really appreciate that. Let's talk BC Sask here. I think this game at least has my eyes. I will be watching this one Saturday. I think we have to go visit. I got to miss the Kraken game Sunday. We got to go visit family friends. I'm like, what are we doing with our lives here? At least Commanders play in the morning. BC at Sask Saturday. I guess we'll go, Jason. Do I have any hope in the world here?
Yeah, absolutely. And, any given game, I think Saskatchewan, the home field advantage there isn't what it used to be. I think that, they're not even tracking for a sellout right now. I've been seeing a lot of posts about that online. So, it's a bigger stadium than most CFL stadiums, but still not tracking for a sellout. Whereas in previous years, you'd easily see that place sold out. So, I think that BC has a shot. I just think they need to go into that first quarter of that game and they need to create some big plays. And I think specifically, VA's got to get Justin McInnis going. I think Justin McInnis led the league in receiving yards this year. He looked much better in the first half of the season when VA was playing than he did when Rourke was put in the lineup. So I think that's a guy I'm really looking forward to seeing if he can get going early in this game and create some big plays. And, BC, like I said, when they're playing, I've said many times, if they're playing their best, they can compete with anybody in the league. But I think ultimately, Saskatchewan is a pretty good defense. They're going to have to be aware of, all the turnovers that Saskatchewan's forced this season. I believe they led the league by a pretty wide margin in terms of turnovers forced this season. Corey Mace did a great job with that in his first season as head coach. So I think BC has a shot, but I think, it really comes down to how the quarterbacks play in this game. And I think that, it's really going to come down to BC's offense, because I think that BC's defense, it really is a very middle of the road kind of team. I think they're not really, there's not a lot of difference makers on that defense this year. Matthew Betts hasn't been the same guy since he returned from the NFL. So I think that, the offense is really going to have to set the tone, and we could be in for kind of a shootout type game, because I think Trevor Harris has been really playing well this year in Saskatchewan too. I think if he had played the whole season, if he didn't miss those 6 or 7 games, I think, if you prorate that over the whole season, I think he would have been the MOP this year personally. So, I think this is going to be the better of the 2 games on Saturday.
You always know you got a good shot when you're like, do I have any chance? And whoever I asked, Jason, the case, it's like, well, any Sunday, whatever, anytime. It always makes me feel. But this is what I'm ready for, and we'll go to Anthony. Like, I love the Lions, right? All this stuff. But I am really ready for either like Grey Cup or we blow all of this up. Like there is something fundamentally wrong in this. And I love Rick and I love all the staff and all that. But I think it was Rod Peterson on one of his shows, when the hockey people got, coaches got let go. And it's like, as good as a coach as you may be or whatever, at some point, what you're saying starts to lose its resonance, right, in the locker room. And I don't know if that is the case, or that's the case with Arm Phillips, or that's the case with whoever, but like something in that equation needs to be resolved here. And so I would like to either we push through this, we figure it out, okay, we were wrong about VA and all of that, or like we really need to blow all this up, because this is just a failure. This is just a failure. Also, Jason, I did like real quick, Anthony, Jason and I were, what the hell was it? Anthony and I were talking. I'm all confused with who I was talking to on the shows here. Anthony and I were talking last week about how I talked to a lot of CFL fans in Vancouver and or people there, and they didn't know about the Lions, or they didn't know any of that. There was comments on the YouTube video like, well, you didn't talk to real people that were born and did. I'm like, always a caveat. It's the same with Saskatchewan. Like, hey, they can't sell out the state, but it's the bigger stadium. That there's always a caveat. Yeah. Anthony, thoughts on this? I know we talked about the Lions off the top, but this is a disaster scenario otherwise.
Yeah, Hussey covered it perfectly. When you got the receiving core that you have in BC, you have the best receivers in the CFL. You have got to get them the football, and you got to bomb it every single time. Anything that you can do to create big plays for this offense, you got to be able to do it. And you got the playmakers to do it. So there's really no excuse. But I will say, Hussey, I know you were talking about, Trevor Harris potentially being MOP. I think the MOP is on the other side on defense with Rowan Milligan. That dude has had such a spectacular season, and with the quarterback play, being good, not great this year. Statistically, I think there needs to be some credit to Milligan being able to be in that conversation for MOP. He has had a spectacular year. I think he can make a big difference in this game. Even if he's not getting the interceptions like he has been all year, I think he can make a big difference in it. I love Saskatchewan in this game. There's a part of me that wants BC to win, because I think it would be a great story to kind of see them make that run to the Grey Cup, but Unfortunately, you look at Saskatchewan, they're so balanced offensively between Trevor Harrison and, in the backfield, they got AJ, they got Armstead, they got Frankie Hickson. Like, they have a really good backfield. And I think that someone like Corey Mace, who's very defensive minded, he wanted to be able to pound the football this year on the ground. And he has certainly done that in Saskatchewan. So they have a really good balance of the offense and defense. I think both of those units are top 4 in the league, and what they do. So I like Saskatchewan winning. And honestly, if Saskatchewan was in the East, I would almost think that they would probably have a better chance of winning it over Montreal. I think they're that good of a football team.
Jason, obviously, the history of all of this great Canadian sport more than I do. But first year head coach like this, Sask, like if they were to make it to the Grey Cup, and it's got to be pretty, I don't know. It seems unprecedented. You probably know better than I do.
The last guy that I believe did it, I'm probably forgetting someone, so don't quote me on this, but I think Corey Chamberlain with Saskatchewan won the Grey Cup in his first year as head coach there, and then kind of flamed out, I believe. Or I think he was a really young upstart head coach when he got hired. And that was a big Grey Cup for them. They won it at home. So that's the one guy I recall. I'll look it up right now, but
I think
that's one guy.
Wasn't Jason in his first year last year when he took Montreal to the Grey Cup and won it?
Oh, yeah.
But he had been a head coach before, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, good for Sask here. Let's round this out before we get out here at the top of the hour. Because we're gonna go. I gotta go watch the Yankees. Hopefully, beat the Dodgers. I don't like the Dodgers. Anthony, Winnipeg here started slow. Everything's churning here. Whatever team goes in, it really feels like you're living in Winnipeg's world here. Thoughts on Winnipeg here going into the final? Obviously, we'll do more talk next week.
I mean, this team, what they've been able to accomplish. I mean, they were 2-6, and through those first 8-9 weeks of the season, I'm sure all of us wanted to write them off and just say, well, Zach Klaris is washed, and this offense can't do anything. All the receivers are hurt, But the one constant with this team has been their defense. And I know the old cliche is defense wins championships, but my God, this Winnipeg defense has been incredible all year. They have been consistent. They are good all around. Defending the pass, defending the run. They've been number 1 all season statistically. And major kudos to Zach Klaris for fighting through, all the shtick that he had to go through, just kind of get through the mental hurdles of the struggles he had at the beginning of the year and be able to pull it through. And then, in the back, they got a running back in that backfield, Brady, that I think can be the MOP of this league as well. He was also been very consistent. He had 6 or 7 games with over 100+ yards rushing this season. And then they're getting healthy at the right time at receiver. They're getting mostly everyone back. So outside of Dalton Schoen, but they got Kenny Lawler back, and they got a good receiving core. So I think overall, it's been really impressive to see Winnipeg, the turnaround they had, winning 9 of the last 10 games. And yeah, I don't think there's a team in the CFL right now that could beat Winnipeg, and they would definitely be my pick for winning the Grey Cup.
And they cleaned this been ages ago in my life, but they cleaned the clock out of Sask, right, in the back-to-back. Didn't they just totally put Banjo Bowl on the Labor Day, right? Am I making that up in my head? Anyone?
It's a long season.
I know. I'm trying to hear, right? CFL's good. I mean, Jake will remind, or Brett will, whoever the hell remember this in the thing. But I mean, wasn't that just anyway? I feel like that. Jason, any other thoughts on Winnipeg here? Let's look back. August. Bombers beat them on the first, and then Bombers beat them at home or whatever, back to back on the So they both times on that. Jason, any thoughts on Winnipeg? We'll get out of here.
Well, Winnipeg, it's been remarkable. The season that they've had, I left them for dead at 2-6. I thought they were done. I thought that was too big of a hole to climb out of. But I think in the CFL, it's very unique. You talk about all these NFL teams that have these piss poor records right now, and you could pretty much write them off in the NFL. But in the CFL, smaller league, if you can get 5 5-6 wins together in a row, like you really can turn your season around at any point. And I think they showed that this year, and they showed that they really have the heart of a champion, and they may not be as scary as they've been in recent years, but like Anthony said, the defense is looking really sturdy. I think that, even if their offensive, passing attack isn't what it used to be, I think Brady Oliveira is still really the heart and soul of that team, and he's had a great season. So they're going to be hard to beat because they got that first place in the West. We didn't really talk about it, but that crazy wind affecting that punt that may have altered the way Saskatchewan had played, in the game against Calgary. And, it's really interesting to see that Winnipeg ended up as the first place team in the West again for the fourth straight year or whatever. But because they got that game at home, I think they're definitely a heavy favorite once again to reach the Grey Cup for the fifth straight year. And, I think that, given the fact they've lost the last 2 years, I'm not super confident that they'll actually win the Grey Cup because, they've gotten into these last 2 years, and they've been classic games, don't get me wrong, but they just have looked off, and Zach Claris hasn't really played particularly well in these playoff games, but they're usually good enough to win the West final, so I'm pretty confident that they'll do that. But one thing, when you guys were just talking right there, the last first-year head coach that I've seen that's won the Grey Cup was actually Scott Milanovich in 2012 with the Toronto Argonauts. So that's the answer.
Well, there you go. We had the wind, right, with Castillo's kick or the punt, and then it led to the kick. And then, right, didn't we have the walk-off rouge, too, off the punt or whatever, right? There was a couple different special teams.
Unfortunately.
We won't talk about that.
Yeah, we're getting out of here. Anthony, anything else from you?
No, just this is probably the most important weekend for the CFL in a little while. So I'm excited that we got meaningful games that are going to make a huge impact on the season. So I'm looking forward to it. Reed, hopefully your team can salvage something out of this season and maybe pull up an upset.
There'll be a lot to talk about. Otherwise, like I said, we'll figure out something next week, probably midweek going into the finals. And then Jason and I and the cavalcade of guests will be there it'll be Saturday, the 16th. So come stop by. We'll be at the Lions Den. They said they're making signage for everybody. It really rolling out the red carpet. So BC is doing a good job there. I think we're going to have good, reliable internet, which is always appreciated. That's always my biggest stressing point going north. So come check that out. I'll post the links and stuff online, but we'll be there. Always does good. Always a fun show. Jason, welcome back. Anthony, thanks for hopping on. And we'll see everyone next time.